And Michael Cohen, to make matters worse, he wrote a book about all of these conversations. The book is called Disloyal, all right? It is probably the only book I would recommend burning, okay? Because the guy is just such a worthless you-know-what. And I read the book and I just had to get rid of it. I didn't burn it only because I didn't want to start a fire, okay? So I got rid of it. I donated it. I gave it away. You know, I don't remember what I did with it. I felt like miserable having that thing in my hands, you know? Because in that book, to my shock, it read like a fiction. He just straight tells about communications that he has with his former client. This is, it's unreal, okay? And in addition, he made a lot of money from the book. And this former lawyer talks about all of his communications with Donald Trump on his podcast, okay? I just want to know, what kind of lawyer would start a podcast? Hey, my friends, I have too much going on to mess around. This is going to be a great episode. There are, in the last 1 week, we have several different lawsuits and constitutional issues and contract issues. I swear to God, Donald Trump, I think I could run a whole law school just based on lawsuits related to Donald Trump. You know, I think about a guy at a strip club, you know, handing out money. Was it making it rain? That is what Donald Trump has done, and especially this New York prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, has done for lawyers. And I'm going to explain why. It's kind of, like I always say, you're going to learn about civil procedure, constitutional law, the court system, contracts, everything. And it's all going to be over these little funny little incidences and lawsuits between all these good folks. Okay. So it all started, right? Last week's episode was detailed about the criminal case against Donald Trump. I think it's a nonsense case. It's going to go nowhere except that it's going to make a lot of lawyers a lot of money, all right? And you can watch last week's episode for full detail. Now, since then, this is the crazy part. So that was April 4. That was 8 days ago, okay? Since then, Congress issued a subpoena to a former New York district attorney. Okay, so that's one whole deal. Then Alvin Bragg, the New York prosecutor, filed a lawsuit against Congress. Okay, after that. So we have a state prosecutor suing the federal Congress. And then, okay, just in case that wasn't enough, we have Donald Trump then filing a $500 million lawsuit against his former attorney, Michael Cohen. Okay, so let me unravel all of this, and you're going to hear kind of the funny way this all connects. And the side note is that you'll learn a lot about the law, all right? And I want to thank Donald Trump. He gave us a ringing endorsement to the podcast.
Subscribe to Run It By My Lawyer. It's like the best podcast, okay? The best. I mean, it's not even a contest. Joe Samo, who's a really funny guy and a great lawyer, by the way, is totally amazing.
All of this, every single thing. I've had a lot of emails and comments after the episode on the criminal case against Donald Trump, because I said, and I was clear, that it is going to lose. The state of New York is not going to win a guilty verdict against Donald Trump. I think it's unlikely they'll even get a trial. I think the judge will dismiss the whole criminal case before a trial. And in the unlikely event there will be a trial, Donald Trump will still not be found guilty. Okay. And I explained that a lot into detail last time. So since then, so listen to this. There's been a lot of misunderstanding about the law. So I got so many emails and comments saying, no, you're wrong. Donald Trump is going to lose, and how could he spend campaign money to pay off a former stripper and blah, blah, blah. That is not what this whole thing is about, all right? What happened was this. Everybody agrees Donald Trump did not use campaign money to pay off Stormy Daniels. That's not what happened. Everybody agrees to that. He, in fact, used his own money to pay off Stormy Daniels. the point of the whole criminal case, believe it or not, is basically the New York prosecutor is saying that Donald Trump should have used campaign money to pay off the former stripper. And the way it works goes like this. Well, he paid her off because he felt like if she got her story out that they had this like little secret overnight excursion or whatever, several years ago, that may hurt his campaign. And so he paid her off to help his campaign. So therefore, it should have been campaign money that paid her off and not his own money. Which is, to me, that's crazy because just think about the implications of that. Let's say, who's my prediction, we're going to have Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom running in 2024. That's my prediction. But whoever it is, right? Let's just say close to the election, whatever, somebody, Ron DeSantis or Gavin Newsom, like they had this college girlfriend or somebody they dated in the past or whatever it was. And, they want to tell a story about how one of them have, a small, what or something, right? And that's one of the things that Stormy Daniels kept saying. And so anyway, so let's say one of them want to do that, right? And then Ron DeSantis or Gavin Newsom say, wait, this is going to embarrass me and it's going to make me look bad. It's going to make me look like I was like foolish in law school or college and I'm going to look like an idiot and it's going to hurt my campaign and blah, blah, blah. This girl wants $200,000 to stay quiet about it. Stormy Daniels just wanted $130,000, but inflation has gone up, right? So it's going to hurt my chances or it's going to embarrass me during the campaign. Let's just pay her the $200,000 for a non-disclosure agreement, which is 100% legal. So let me get this straight. If I was one of their lawyers, I'd say, well, whatever you do, don't pay her with your own money. Use the money that United States citizens donated to your campaign to pay her off so that the whole world doesn't hear this story about your small penis, right? How the hell is that going to work? Do you see what I'm saying? I think it's pretty freaking clear that his proper campaign money was, for rallies and, airplane, like flights to rallies or TV time and things like that. It's crazy that he's going to have to make this argument that Donald Trump should have used campaign money to pay her off and not his own money. Okay. And the reason why I go into that detail, especially in the last episode, is because the whole country's legal system has been turned upside down over this issue, okay, over how he should have classified money that he gave to her, okay? And since then, we now have a battle, okay, between the federal Congress and the state of New York. So on April 4, 2023, Donald Trump got arraigned, a former president getting arraigned, and then within 2 days then, Congress, and this is Jim Jordan, he's a Republican congressman from Ohio, he issued a subpoena to David Pomerantz, who used to work for the New York State prosecutor. And the subpoena says, we order you to come to Congress and we order you to give us all of these documents and testify before us. And in that subpoena, from U.S. Congress, that subpoena is, he details Congressman Jim Jordan, that, David Pomerantz, who David Pomerantz wrote a book about this. He's a freaking paperback writer. You guys know who sings that song? Paperback writer? Come on. You're just a kid. Zeke? The Beatles. Yep. Okay. So David Pomerantz is a paperback writer. And he wrote about this. He wrote about how the district attorney, the prosecutors kind of talked about this case, what their opinions were, that, we shouldn't go after Trump. We should go after Trump. And, that they were kind of, the different like dealings that they had and even things about how they talked about witnesses or the credibility of witnesses and things like that. So then Jim Jordan says, well, then you're going to have no problem coming to Congress to talk about it. And by the way, we want, documents that you guys had, letters that you guys were passing, back and forth between each other and letters that you had to witnesses and police officers and whatever, right? We want everything. Okay, so that was then done 2 days after the arraignment. And then, okay, the prosecutor for the state of New York, Alvin Bragg, then files a federal lawsuit against Congress. Okay, these are words that when I was in law school, if somebody said that, we would have laughed. Like, we would have been like, what are you guys? That will never happen. You'll never have a prosecutor suing Congress in a federal court because he's trying to convict a former president for paying off a stripper. Like, I can't believe our country is being turned over upside down over these issues. So here we go. But nonetheless, that's what happened. So that was April 11th. That was just yesterday. Okay, so yesterday, right? Today's April 12th. Yeah, yesterday. He files this lawsuit against Congress. And this is kind of, I obtained the lawsuit here. And I couldn't, the toughest part about this lawsuit was just trying to narrow down some of the things that I would discuss. So what we have here is this. So Jim Jordan, the Congress member, he wants David Pomerantz, the former district attorney, to come to Congress and give this paperwork and explain, why the state of New York wants to prosecute a former president. And what Alvin Bragg goes into detail in this lawsuit explaining is that this is all just a big intimidation tactic, okay? Which I find it almost as an oxymoron to say we're trying, intimidating a prosecutor, because in theory, the prosecutor, everything they do is freaking scary, right? And they have the power of freaking prison when they go after people, right? So I think the first order of business is it's fair speech to say a prosecutor is incompetent, that they're corrupt, that they're this, they're that. So Alvin Bragg makes it a point in this lawsuit to talk about how all of the Republicans, basically, Congress members and the former president, are trying to intimidate him. And he says things, he says how Donald Trump said that, that Alvin Bragg is a Soros-backed animal, okay? And then he calls that a dog whistle claim. And then we have, so Alvin Bragg posted this image that Donald Trump had posted on his social media site of him holding this baseball bat, and then right next to the baseball bat is the prosecutor. And Donald Trump agreed or admitted that this was his post, and he said something like, oh, I wasn't pretending to try to beat up Alvin Bragg. It was more like, we should buy things made in America, like this baseball bat, okay? Gosh, that was, I think that what's happening here is that it's not that Alvin Bragg is filing a separate lawsuit against Donald Trump over this intimidation, but what he's saying is that Jim Jordan and the Republicans in Congress are kind of like colluding together, colluding to go after him and intimidate him. And that is one that post on whatever it's called, Truth Media, was kind of an example of that. And then he says, in his lawsuit against federal Congress, what he is claiming is that the federal Congress is breaching the law of federalism. And what I mean by that, and this is where, we have the whole thing is there's a strict kind of like a separation of powers, right? Between the Congress and the president and the Supreme Court. If you think about it, that's just the separation of powers within the federal government. Then this is it's close to a freaking revolution here between the power of the state of New York versus the federal government, right? Because we know that the state of New York is more, blue. They're, Democrats, right? We know that the federal government, at least when Donald Trump was president, right? I mean, the president was a Republican. So the federal government was, Republican led, let's say, right? And then, that he had more seats in Congress, more Republican seats in Congress. So what I mean by this revolution is we then have now the federal government kind of fighting with the state of New York, right? And now, so Alvin Bragg is bringing this up, and he's saying that the federal government is trying to force the state of New York to drop its criminal case against Donald Trump, so that the federal government is trying to get into the state of New York's government. And now he's asking a federal court in New York, all right, to get Jim Jordan, the Congress member of Ohio, to back off, right? To say that all of this, you cannot subpoena this former district attorney, because by doing that, you're kind of like intimidating him. You're going to try to get evidence that's, between like what lawyers said to each other. And then Jim Jordan said, well, what's the big deal? David Pomerantz wrote a freaking book about it already, right? So he's, it's a pretty good argument, right? He wrote a book about it. Like, why not just tell us the whole story instead of, cherry pick a few little things in your own book, okay? And this lawsuit, it's unbelievable. This lawsuit sprang from the Donald Trump criminal case lawsuit. Like, when I used to teach law at a law school, I used to have this kind of joke. It's like, it's the most amazing thing when a lawsuit emerges just from another lawsuit. It's kind of like, you have a freaking red rose growing, and then all of a sudden a sunflower grows out of it, right? This is this craziness. This lawsuit, the only reason for this lawsuit against Congress is because of what is going on in the lawsuit against Donald Trump, right? So, okay, so now what the federal court, and we're involving the federal Congress, we're involving the whole state of New York government, and then we're involving the federal judiciary, okay? Because this is not going to, when the federal court in New York decides a case, it's not going to be over.
Nothing is over! Nothing!
All right? Because after that, it's going to be appealed, whatever the decision is, to the circuit court, and then it could possibly be appealed from that to the United States Supreme Court. So that's why I said earlier that our whole legal system is getting turned upside down over this issue about the payment from Donald Trump to Stormy Daniels. Okay, so he is asking this federal court to force Congress to force Congress to stop making comments, about the prosecutor, to stop sending subpoenas and requests for the prosecutor to show up in Congress in Washington, D.C. to explain all of this. And then he's also, let me see, I'm going to quote this from Alvin Bragg's lawsuit. Plaintiff Alvin Bragg, the New York State prosecutor, is the first Black person to serve as district attorney of Manhattan. District Attorney Bragg has spent 2 decades in public service, having previously served as Chief Deputy Attorney General in New York, and he's a big shot, okay? White collar prosecutor, District Attorney Alvin Bragg believes in holding powerful people accountable. So I don't know how. Well, he's also, he's saying that the federal government and part of their intimidation is going after him, intimidating him based on his race, like things like this, calling him an animal, right? They're intimidating him on his race. They're intimidating him because they're the federal government. They're intimidating him by having former attorneys in his office, forcing them to come to Congress so they could depose him. Now, the one thing I take issue with here, and I take big issue with, he talks about how in this lawsuit, they're trying to intimidate such an honorable man who's prosecuted criminals in New York, and he flaunts how he went after the Trump organization, and that how he went after Alan Weisselberg. Okay, this reason alone is why, just alone this reason, I think Alvin Bragg should be kicked out of office. Somebody asked me earlier, how can you say Alvin Bragg is corrupt? What do you mean by corrupt? The reason why I say he's corrupt is because I think it's pretty clear, and it's going to come out, that he's going after a big name, Donald Trump, as opposed to a clear criminal. All right, and this is why this is my evidence. Okay, this guy Alan Weisselberg, on unrelated charges, stole millions of dollars. Okay, and lied on his taxes. He was getting millions of dollars of income that he wasn't reporting on his federal state taxes. And the state of New York got him for it, right? I mean, it was clear that he would be getting, millions of dollars, and he wasn't reporting that income for years. And he pleaded guilty to it. I mean, it was obvious, right? And they had up to 15 years in prison that they could have requested. And instead, they gave him 2-3 months, right? And the whole reason why they gave him, that kind of lenient sentence was so that he can help them in their prosecution against Donald Trump. So it just shows to me that he's going after a big name as opposed to a big criminal. That's, I'm excited to see how this plays out, because if I could be proved wrong, I will be the first one to come out and say I'm wrong. Okay, so, and I think Alvin Bragg, if he's an honorable person, in every single document from now on, when he talks about this, he should state, I gave the guy a freebie so that I could go after Donald Trump. If he doesn't say that, he's not telling the full truth. Okay, now what is going to happen? If we have like 5 or 6 hours, I could finish talking about this, but I know we don't. So I'm going to wrap up just this portion. Okay. I think that he has a point, though, Alvin Bragg. Some of the things that Congress wants shouldn't be available, in the sense that they're requesting like actual like letters, emails, things like that between the lawyers themselves. Okay, so that one would be, I think, overboard. I do think Congress would have the right to ask them things like, well, why are you going after the president? Why did you let off this other guy, and agree not to, go after a full sentence against him? Why did you agree to not prosecute Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former attorney? Why did you agree on the, I think all of those things are fine, especially from our paperback writer friend, David Pomerantz. I think all of that is fine. I think where they potentially cross the line is where they start asking for actual like written correspondences between the attorneys and the prosecutor's office. So I think Alvin Bragg has a point there. Okay. I think that, what's the crazy part, though, is that we have to resolve these issues before the criminal case against Donald Trump proceeds, so I think that that's going to end up potentially delaying the criminal case against Donald Trump, because it's not going to be something that is going to be finished in the trial court in the state of New York. It's going to, whatever the decision is. I've always said in cases like this, I wish the trial court would say something like, look, this is obviously going to be appealed to a higher authority. Why don't we just send the case there? Instead, you know what they do is they say, well, why don't we sit on this for several months and make a lot of money, make a decision that's going to be just disregarded anyway, so that the appellate court can make a decision. Like, this is what us lawyers like to do, okay? So, man, there's too much paperwork here. I got to start buying like heavy-duty staplers, okay? The lawyers, we like to file a lot of paperwork. And by the way, the paperwork I printed out was very, very small compared to all the other paperwork. Okay, so anyway, then today, Donald Trump files a lawsuit against his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, over all of this, okay? And this one is a good lawsuit, and it's going to, we're going to talk about, there's jurisdiction, contract issues, attorney ethical issues, criminal issues, all of the above. All right, so let me set this up. So President Donald Trump hired Michael Cohen about 15 years ago to be one of his many attorneys, right? And then between attorney and clients, there are very strict rules. Attorneys are the fiduciary for the client, okay? They're the fiduciaries for the client, which means that they have to look out for the client. There are rules that every state has, and they entered into their working relationship in the state of Florida. And in there, and in the state of New York, it's because he represented him in Florida cases and Florida issues and in New York issues. So there are rules in both states that require the attorney to represent the client, to have everything that the client and attorney discuss is confidential, meaning you cannot discuss it, right? Unless you have the client's permission. Now, the exception is if the client is engaging in some sort of criminal activity and he's, kind of pressuring or making the attorney do something criminal, then that could be potentially an exception. But it doesn't work really for Michael Cohen because Michael Cohen was never like, he was the lawyer, dang it. And he wasn't, I'm a lawyer, right? I would never, ever talk about what a client says to me. If I feel, and I have had this problem where I'm like, wait, what the client wants me to do is unethical or it's potentially criminal, right? So instead of doing it, I would just say, I can't represent you because that would be criminal. And I've had I've had some clients that have said, oh, my former husband, I could show that he made all this money and he didn't declare it on his taxes and blah, blah, blah. And tell him that, in our settlement discussion. And I said, are you crazy? Because that would be extortion, right? And it would be criminal. So I'm just not going to do it. Well, Michael Cohen later said is that he would do those criminal acts and then he sold out his client later. Do you see what I'm saying? So, it's a clear violation. That is one of the few things that I despise the most is if a lawyer is going to then, betray the client and go in detail about revealing those confidential, those confidential communications. And Michael Cohen, to make matters worse, he wrote a book about all of these conversations. The book is called Disloyal, all right? It is probably the only book I would recommend burning, okay? Because the guy is just such a worthless you-know-what. And I read the book and I just had to get rid of it. I didn't burn it only because I didn't want to start a fire. Okay, so I got rid of it. I donated it. I gave it away. I don't remember what I did with it. I felt like miserable having that thing in my hands, because in that book, to my shock, it read like a fiction. He just straight tells about communications that he has with his former client. It's unreal. Okay. And in addition, he made a lot of money from the book. And this former lawyer talks about all of his communications with Donald Trump on his podcast. Okay. I just want to know what kind of lawyer would start a podcast. Okay. What kind of lawyer would do that? All right. He should be freaking shot just for that. Okay. So, and he talks about his former client. And what does all of this relate to? Stormy Daniels. Now, what happened was Michael Cohen was the one that actually paid her off with his own money. And then he got the money back from Donald Trump. Okay. Wouldn't that be weird if he interviewed Stormy Daniels on his podcast? He did that a few times, right? And he talked about this case and he talked about all of these different negotiations that he had. So finally, Donald Trump is suing Michael Cohen. This is the rare time that I'll say Donald Trump is going to win that one. Okay. This is, I think I've covered like 15 lawsuits of Donald Trump. I think I've said that 12 of them he would lose and probably 3 of them he would win. So this is the one of them. Okay. So here we go. He is suing Michael Cohen because Michael Cohen is the one that started all this problem. He got kind of busted for some other unrelated things. And the unrelated thing was when Mueller was investigating Donald Trump over this kind of dealings with Russia and things like that. At one point, they asked Michael Cohen to go to Congress to talk about Donald Trump's dealing with Russia. He says to Congress under oath, I'm going to tell the whole truth, to Congress about it. And then he lied to Congress about Donald Trump's dealings with Russian companies. He would say things like, yeah, we wanted to build the Trump Towers in Moscow, but we ditched that idea before, the election and this and that. And then later he said, no, I just lied. I lied to Congress about it, So when he was getting in hot water over that, what he did, according to this lawsuit and the flipping book that he wrote, okay, what he did was he more or less told the prosecutor, I got an idea. How about I tell you about this thing we did with this former stripper so that you could give me leniency on this case that you have against me. Okay. Wow. So that is all detailed in this lawsuit. And what kills me is that in addition to the general New York ethical rules for attorneys, Donald Trump had his own lawyers draft a confidentiality agreement that Michael Cohen signed when he represented Donald Trump. And that confidentiality agreement said, like, it detailed that anything we discuss, you're never going to tell. And even things that don't relate to your representation of me, like common, discussions or whatever, you're not going to discuss. Michael Cohen, a lawyer, signed all of that. Then he started discussing all of that later in his book, on his podcast. Once again, what kind of lawyer would start a podcast? Okay. So he discussed all that and he just ratted out Donald Trump over everything, even things that weren't criminal, like, oh, Donald Trump would say racist things. Donald Trump would say, my daughter is sexy looking, and his daughter was 15 at the time, and he, like all of these different things that he said about his former client. To me, as a lawyer, I mean, I don't know. It would be like a doctor, coming out later and saying, check out these x-rays, check out these notes that I had and check out this. And the worst part is he did all of this so that he can get a more lenient sentence. Okay. So he did all that so he can get a more lenient sentence. And then he did all of this, the podcast and the book to make more money. All right. So this particular lawsuit, Donald Trump against Michael Cohen, I think Donald Trump will win. All right. I am positive he'll win. The only funny part is that there's a way out for Michael Cohen. And that is, hey, Michael Cohen, all the money you make, just spend it. Because if you spend it, what's Donald Trump going to go after you for, So it's kind of because it's Michael Cohen in the criminal case and all these other cases, you have to like pay up everything. So I don't know how much money he actually has. So this lawsuit against him might be more for show than it is for dough. There you have it. As always, wow, I was bombarded with emails and comments and I loved all of it. If I haven't gotten back to you yet, I promise I will. All right. So there you have it. I'll see you folks next week.